This computer's life as a crypto miner is over. But don't worry, we're going to make it into a great gaming PC. Hey everybody, it's Chris from Family Geekery, and I've got a friend who probably a couple years ago I put together this mining PC for him. He just wanted a cheap little rig to throw a really nice graphics card in, and he was going to mine some crypto with it, and he did it for a couple years, but now that's kind of went kaput. So he says, hey man, what's it going to take to make this into a gaming machine? So I said, well, drop it by and I'll take a look at it, see what we got in there, because I kind of forgot what I put in there, and see what it's going to take to obviously clean it up first, and then get it looking nice and snazzy and playing some decent games. So starting right off the bat, you can see what we're starting here, EVGA GeForce RTX 3080. So this is still a decent, really nice graphics card, still high dollar graphics card. So that's obviously going to be kept. We've also got an 850 watt fully modular power supply, so we can clean that up and keep that. But the rest of it's got to go. We've got a small 120 gigabyte SSD in there. That was just enough to load the mining software, but we're not going to throw Windows on that. We're going to have to get a bigger one. And the motherboard and CPU and RAM. This is an old, if you see there, it says Acer. So I remember actually pulling this out of like an Acer, just a really cheap computer. So this is an i3, like a second generation i3. It's got 3 sticks of 2 gigabytes of RAM, so 6 gigabytes of RAM. But it's old RAM, it's an old CPU. It's a piece of garbage motherboard. So we're going to scrap all that. We're going to get rid of this ugly case. So basically we're going to just be starting with a GPU and a pretty nice power supply, and we're going to have to build the rest out. Now this has to be done on a budget, so I'm going to have to find out what I've got around here and see what we can make with it. Alright, so after double checking with my friend and giving him some options, it turns out I was wrong. He's not going to be using this new computer as a gaming computer. He's going to be using it as a streaming computer. So the streaming computer, he's going to have his gaming computer hooked up to, and his gaming computer is just going to game. His streaming computer is going to hook up with like OBS and broadcast this over to Twitch or whatever he streams to. So the graphics card will definitely be more than enough power to process the the rendering of the encoding of the video for streaming. The power supply is going to be plenty fine. So we got to make sure that we get the right parts for what he needs to do, and that's going to be streaming. So let's see what kind of options we got here. Alright, 6 screws and a couple tie wraps later. I got the 2 pieces that we're going to keep out of there, and you can see, yes, they are very dusty. So I'm going to go take these in the other room and blow them off, hopefully get the majority of that dust out of there, and get them ready to go into something new. Alright, so I used a very strong blower and got probably 90% of the dust out of this GPU. If he wants it any cleaner than that, I think he's going to have to take it apart and clean it manually. But I think it's good enough for now at least, and I got pretty much all the dust off the power supply. So I'm going to set those aside, and I'm going to bring out the option for an upgrade. Alright, so here is our donor candidate, if you will. And what this is an iBuyPower. You can see that, which is a pre-built company, an integrator, maybe you might want to call them. And they buy all the parts from the manufacturers. They put together a pre-built system and sell them maybe in Walmart or Best Buy. And the way they make their money is they'll have a manufacturer like ASRock in this case put together a motherboard that's special for them. And it's generally very similar to, they probably have, in this case it's a Z370 Pro 4, and there's a -IB after it. That probably stands for iBuyPower. And they do something, they save a couple bucks on this particular motherboard in some way or another. In this case, it looks like down here at the bottom, there should be another PCI slot there that's just not soldered on, right? The connection is there, but there's just no plastic thing to actually hold it. So that's how they save a little bit of money. And I've had a lot of these different iBuy Powers and a couple other brands come through the shop here, and they're all decent. They all work great. It's just you got to know what the limitations are. So in this case, we're not going to need that extra card there. So I think we're going to be completely fine. And I think underneath here we've got an AIO with 120 millimeter rad, and it's actually a push-pull, which is nice. Instead of just having one fan, it's got a fan to pull the air in and then a fan to push it out the back. So we've got a CPU under here, and I'm not 100% sure what the CPU is under there, but I think it's an i7-8700K. We'll double check that once we boot it up. But we're going to take the power supply out of it. We're going to find some RAM for it. We've already got the GPU for it, so we'll probably get Windows installed on this Western Digital 240 gig hard drive here. And then we're going to add some more storage in, because he wants like a 2 terabyte drive in there to store he's probably going to be recording whatever he's streaming, to re-upload it back onto YouTube or something. So we're going to get him a big SATA disk installed in here and get him plenty of space. So let's take the unneeded parts out of here and get ready to start throwing the new ones in. Alright, so I took the back case off, and we can see in here lots of wires. I'm going to keep all the wires that are going from like the front I/O up top here, which you can't see. That's going into the motherboard. That's all going to be good to go. So really I'm just going to identify the cables coming from the power supply and unplug them so we can get this power supply out and get the new one in. And I believe I looked this one up. I believe it was an 8700K. It originally had like a 1080 in there that someone had pulled out. And it looks like probably a 1 terabyte drive down here. That's pretty typical for all these integrators. They were using a small SSD for Windows and then a big 1 terabyte drive usually for that. So we'll probably take that out and put it in a 2 terabyte drive, but at least all the cabling is there ready for me. So let's get rid of all the power cables and get ready to put the new one in. Alright, so the connections coming out of the power supply that we needed to remove from the case here. Of course, there's a big 24 pin connector that goes to the motherboard. There was a 2x4 pin ATX around here somewhere that was going up to the motherboard for the CPU. That was real fun to get to because it was actually behind that AIO stack. So I had to get my fingers real small to get it in there. Hopefully not as much trouble getting the new one in there. And then there was, of course, 2 SATA connections, one going to the SATA drive and one going to the SSD that was in the front. And then there is this Molex connector here, which is going up to this, what must be a fan controller or RGB light controller. There is an RGB light bar across the top, so we'll see if we got a Molex on that power supply that we're putting in there to get this hooked up. And now everything's disconnected, so I can take the 4 screws out of the back and slide this power supply right out. Alright, so like I said about these pre-built systems, they do try to cut corners a little bit to save money. In this case, they're using a high power supply. I guess that's the name brand, I've never heard of it. But it is rated as an 80 plus, and it's 600 watts. So it was enough to run the 1080 that was in there, and plus the i7. And obviously it had no problems. This thing was running just fine when I took it apart. So we'll set that aside. We'll get that 850 put in there so we got plenty of power for that big beefy 3080 card. So I moved the small SSD from the front to the back, and that's just to make the cables a little bit easier to hide and to get where they need to go. And then I pulled out the drive, the SATA drive out of here, and yes, it was a 1 terabyte, and it's actually a Seagate Barracuda, which is pretty nice. And we're going to replace that with a 2 terabyte, same type, Barracuda. And one thing I like about hard drives is they usually have a manufacture date, and this one shows May of 2018. And you can use that to know not only how old the drive is, but potentially how old, the system is. So it's not terribly old. This probably still has some life in it, but we're going to replace it with a brand new one, give them a little bit more storage, and we'll set this one to the side. Alright, so I got the new power supply installed in there. I've got it wired up to everything. I've got the PCIe for the GPU connectors just dangling out the front here. And what I've done is I've placed in just a cheap HDMI card in there, just a tiny little card. And what I like to do is I like to boot it up and make sure that everything's working right first before I go ahead and put in the very expensive, part. So this is going to make sure that I've got the RAM installed right, the CPU is looking good, and the hard drives are both hooked up. So next step is I've got my tiny little monitor here installed. Got a little wireless mouse and keyboard to make it easy, and I'm going to boot her up and see what happens. And here we go. Let's see if I can get into BIOS. Nope, went into Windows too quick. But that's alright. We'll just go ahead and verify everything in Windows so far. And yes, I was right. This is an i7 8700K. And here's our 16 gigs of RAM. And it's got the C drive, which is 224 gigabytes is what it's showing in Windows. And then here's our 2 terabyte SATA drive, which we will have to format. That only takes a second. And here's our little placeholder of a GeForce GT 710 that I've used for booting several hundred computers over the years, just to test it out before I put in the big one. So this looks good. So let's go ahead and shut this down, and I'll go ahead and add in the rest of the parts, and then we'll test it out. Alright, so I've got the big GPU in there, and before I go ahead and boot this thing up and finish it up and test it out, I'm actually going to be adding in one of these guys too. So since it's going to be a streaming PC, I asked him if he had a encoder card yet, and he didn't. He said he was going to buy an external one, and I asked him if he needed 4K or not. He said no. So I said, well, I've got an extra HD60 Pro, which is an internal version instead of an external. So instead of using USB, it uses PCI. And what I like about that is once you plug this thing in there, it's just always in there. So when OBS looks for it, it's always in the same place. With a USB device, sometimes if you unplug it and plug it back in, you unplug it, maybe you put in a USB drive and then you plug back in your external USB encoder card, then it might come in and think it's a different USB device, and OBS has to re-find it. So this will allow him to have all of his presets, all of his scenes set up in OBS without having to reconfigure the video capture card settings. So I'm going to go ahead and install this down in one of the free PCI slots, and then we'll get ready to test. Alright, I plugged in that extra card, the HD60 Pro. I got the GPU set up in there, so let's go ahead and test fire this guy here. And we got a screen. We should have Windows in just a second. And it seems silly plugging a 3080 RTX into, what, a 19-inch Dell monitor. But this is just for testing. And there we go. We'll probably have to download some drivers for Windows to recognize the NVIDIA card. Let's see if it recognizes it without getting some drivers. Nope, not yet. So I'm going to go ahead and download some drivers for it. Oh, there we go. And it found it right away. So here it is, RTX3080. It just had to find it. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to make sure I get this SATA drive formatted. So let's go into find disk manager or disk management, and it automatically just found it. It said, hey, this disk hasn't been initialized yet, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And here it is down here, disk 1, and we can go ahead and do a new simple volume. Click next, go ahead and give it the maximum size, and it's going to show up as a D drive. And we can call this maybe video, and he can rename that. And it's formatting. And there we go, it found the D drive. So now if we go and check out this PC, we've got our Windows drive there, and then here's our video drive with 2 terabytes ready to go. Alright, so the last couple things I need to do. One, I'm going to let it go ahead and download some updates from Windows. 2, I'm going to clean up the cabling in the back and put the back door back on. And then 3, find the glass window for the side and slap that on there. And then it's ready to be turned back over to my buddy. And here it is, all finished. Got both the doors back on, I got the cables cleaned up in the back, and I got all the updates done in Windows. So I was actually able to find on that controller in the back when I was cleaning up the wires, that little controller that ran what I thought to be the lights, actually had a little cable coming off it that said IR remote, and there's actually right here a little thing that says point remote here. So I went and found one of these that comes with all those RGB lights that you get, and it wasn't exactly the right IR remote, but I just kept on hitting buttons until I could get it stay solid red. And now the lights, it shows orange on the camera, but it's actually red, and it matches the RAM. So I've got a light underneath, and then the light above, and then on the front here. So if we turn off the lights, you can see what it looks like all finished up. So not bad for a budget build. I definitely saved as much money as I could for my friend with all these parts, and I hope he enjoys it and I hope it works great for him. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked following me along with this build, go ahead and give me that thumbs up. If you want to see more stuff like this, I've definitely got plenty of parts and more systems to build and more people to help. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button and follow along with me on my journey. But thank you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out. Ooh, so pretty.